So, I would like to welcome you all so very much to this seminar where I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into our upcoming book, The Game Needs to Change Towards Sustainable Game Design. It's not quite a launch yet, mostly maybe because I don't have a pre-order code yet. So, that's going to come up soon, and as soon as I have this... where I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into our upcoming book, The Game Needs to Change Towards... The audio works? Yep. Good. Maybe because I don't have a pre-order code yet. So, is this me? That's going to come up soon. Fantastic. I have the link open to the stream. See? Fantastic. So I managed to be the professor who messed up his tag anyways. Good. Hey, Ole. Oh, we started.
Yeah, well, you have already started.
A little bit.
Yeah, why not? So, welcome everybody.
Go nuts.
Jag pratar svenska, Patrick kommer prata engelska. Välkomna till institutionen för speldesign. Här arrangerar vi tillsammans med Sverok, dataspelsbranschen och Svenska spelforskarrådet Spelalmedalen, där vi under det paraplyet försöker belysa spel ur alla möjliga olika perspektiv. Och i dagens frukostseminarium får vi möta Patrick Prax som är forskare här på institutionen. Jag förutsätter att du kommer att prata engelska.
I'll speak English.
Yeah.
I'll give a quick summary of.
Men frågor och så kan ställas på svenska. Och för allas information så finns det en nödutgång där och en nödutgång där. Och skulle någonting hända så är det återsamling utanför muren här, utanför huset. Bra! Välkomna, varsågod Patrik.
Thank you so much, Ulla. So, quick summary for our international audience. This is part of Almedalen, which is the Swedish Democracy Festival every year on Gotland. We are hosting an event around games together with the Dataspelsbranschen, the Swedish game industry representation organization, and Sverok, which is the biggest civic society organization in Sweden centered around games and play. And we're here basically in my normal lecture room where I'm normally speaking with my students, so it's a very nice and familiar setting to discuss games and sustainability. So yeah, I'm, again, thrilled to welcome you here to the sneak peek into our book. So, I want to start with a little story. We had been organizing sustainability game jams together with other Nordic universities for 3 years. That means that we had students and faculty from as far as Iceland, Finland, Estonia, and Denmark coming together, students and teachers, to first discuss what sustainability in games could look like, and then make games with the students on that topic. It was a really, really interesting group of people coming together, really a safe space to discuss these sort of issues, and an amazing community, super fun. At the start of one of these seminars, one of the students comes to us as sort of faculty and starts talking about their game they're making. She's running a small indie studio, and they're making a sustainability game. And she's of course super excited talking about it, like how does it work, how does it get its message across? And it's a super fascinating conversation, and we're all like really pumped for it. And then the mood shifts a little bit, and she says like, but yeah, of course we have been talking about these big systemic issues before in the lecture, and yeah, we do know that we get the money for our company from Meta, Facebook, because Meta and Facebook have been launching a suite of smaller game studios that have sort of sustainability-themed games that they are publishing as part of their PR campaign to persuade the European Union to step away from more systemic regulation on platform capitalism, big digital platforms, and games and the games industry in general. So of course, that soured the mood a little bit. We had this super engaged, young, creative game designer with their studio, with the indie studio here, knowing that the cool game they were making was already part of the greenwashing efforts of one of those huge international corporations. This is a situation that I don't want to have, right? I don't want to have game designers, creatives asking themselves, okay, but what does our game really do in the bigger sense? And I wanted to create a possibility to have a way to think around that, to make sure that we can maybe sidestep the sort of greenwashing and have a goal in mind, somehow address the sort of bigger question. So this is where we wanted to discuss the game needs to change towards sustainability in game design. Yes, my name is Patrick. I'm associate professor here in the game design department on Gotland. It's a funny little island in the Baltic. A lot of churches, some of them are fine, many of them are ruins. This is my family sitting in one of them. I have a PhD in media and communication studies, so I wrote my dissertation back in the days like everybody else on World of Warcraft. If that interests you, there's a TED talk about that, me standing in front of a giant lava monster. Recently, I've been working a lot more with questions around sustainability. So here you can see me giving a talk for the Sustainability Nexus event in Cologne, the keynote for that event, where we were looking much closer at what systemic sustainability for games could mean. And when I mean systemic sustainability, I typically refer to perspectives from the United Nations report, Making Peace with Nature. And here they highlight, and this is text from the United Nations, right? This typically written by nature scientists with quite strong language, considering what this report is, that decades of incremental efforts have failed addressing the climate crisis because vested and short-term interests often prevail, and that we need a system-wide transformation with fundamental change in the technological, economic, and social organization of society, including worldviews, norms, values, and governance. That is everything. The United Nations, in very, very clear words, tell us that we need to rethink how we build society. They also point out that there's an opposition to this change, right? That is where these vested and short-term interests come in. All right, that is a quite big perspective to bring to the games industry. How do people in the industry see that? This is from a report from the state of the games industry from GDC and Game Developer. These are the people that run the GDC conference and also one of the biggest sort of games news sites. In the last 12 months, how successful, and this is from 2023, so published in 2024, how successful do you think your company's attempts at environmentalism, sustainability, or carbon offsetting have been? And we can see that nearly 60% is not at all successful or just slightly successful, and their own analysis indicates that the biggest change was developers who were saying not successful at all. 27%, an increase from 10% in the year before. So tripled the amount of people in the industry who say our studio is not successful at all in addressing climate change. They also have some quotes in this report, which is really interesting. Yeah, they have been diligent, but there's still the silent belief that first we make money, then we clean after ourselves, without accepting that this is pretty much the mindset that brought the global society to this state. The environmental crisis seems a much larger problem than my current company believes to be able to tackle. Or here, I'm just not going to read all of them, but I really like that pointing out this personal versus collective responsibility question of, okay, so what is really our thing that we need to do? Where does the responsibility of the individual start or end? What do we need to do collectively? Speaking in the space a little bit, we had a panel in the Game Developers Conference 2023 on the Educator Summit, where I was speaking together with also Sonja, who's an amazing games researcher from Cologne, but here my two co-editors for the book, Clayton Whittle and Trevin York. Amazing people. I'm so thankful to them for doing this work with me. Actually, I was kind of lucky because they already started doing this work before I even really learned about it. They were also the first authors for the Environmental Game Design Playbook. This is something that has been produced by the Climate Special Interest Group of the International Game Developers Association, the IGDA. So this is game developers, people from the games industry, who got together, started a community. And by the way, this is one of the most amazing communities that I have had the pleasure of being a part of. It's super welcoming, super friendly, with mentorship, help, like a place to vent, support for dealing with the sort of mental health fallout of dealing with these crises. So if you haven't joined that already, please do. It's an amazing place. But they have already written this Environmental Game Design Playbook that is looking at tactics as a game developer for using your games to inspire change. And some of the things that they've been working with are really, really interesting successes. For example, some of the people in this group have been behind taking a look at the hardware inside the Xbox, figuring out how to measure how much energy it's using in the first place, because that wasn't built in from the start, and then making that information available to game developers in the development kit, so that the people who were making games for that platform, for this console, could run their build and see, okay, so this draws this much power, and then optimize for it. That was not possible before, right? Which is mind-blowing if you consider that, okay, so before, as a developer, you didn't really have a handle on how much energy your game was using. So this led to that now, Call of Duty on console has, and on PC, has an echo mode. So far, this echo mode, what it does, and this is what I consider a low-hanging fruit here, but absolutely worthwhile and I think everybody agrees, why haven't we been doing this already? It's taking a look at the resolution and screen refresh rate of the background screen when you're in the pause in the game, right? You play the game, you go to a pause screen, switch your weapons, do something, whatever, chat with somebody, and before the game has been rendering full graphics on full resolution and full screen refresh rate, that background that doesn't change, right? It's like completely pointless, wasted energy. Looking at that, they found that we don't need to do this. Reduced the refreshment rate, reduced the resolution, saved a lot of energy, and are still doing that in the process, and not a single player has noticed. Right? So this is the first step to do this, and this is a best practice that's coming out of this sort of work that we should be applying in the industry everywhere. And then think about next steps. And this is the next steps where we're coming back to the book to try to figure out what that could mean. So for our book, it's based on both industry practice and research, and we wanted to give a voice to those who are already working in sustainability in gaming and through gaming, right? These two are important. What can we do in the industry in making games or through making games, in the process that we make games that is improving our practices, reducing our impact, and is helping us do better here? But how can we get a positive impact through the message of our games so that the behavior of our players can change and we can be a part of that sort of collective change in this perspective? It's helping you find ways to resonate with players, find concrete starting points, and get started no matter your role. It's meant to speak to game makers, wider members of the games industry, also people in management, people in other industry or interest organizations that are participating in this and are interested. We are also looking to learn more about the perspectives of publishers, platforms, and policymakers. They are included here, but I would really like to have more insight on their perspectives on what we need to do in order to make this function. It's also speaking, of course, to researchers, academics, and students who care about these perspectives, because also our students do care about these perspectives, and they would, of course, like to graduate into an industry that also cares. So the starting point, taking away from the United Nations report of where we need to go, and this is my text, is that we need meaningful climate action in the games industry that features collective responsibility and action, aims for material change, so it cannot just be that we talk about things differently, but something in the material world needs to change to make this better. It needs to resist greenwashing, and it needs to systemic change, so that we build, right, society differently. That is the end goal. The book is structured that we first line out this philosophical and approach in the first section about systemic approaches. Then we have this section basically about making games, right? That is telling stories from a sustainable future. Then about the impact of games as a message to the player, integrating environmental messages into game design and mechanics. And then we sum up with a perspective on more the perspective of the developer themselves, working with these sort of issues and how to deal with that and going from theory to action. So I would like to give you a brief overview over the different chapters here and what they are doing, and then in the end have a little bit of time for questions and discussion. So, in the start out, systemic approaches, the first chapter, that is mine. I sort of talked about that a little bit already. I will come back to that in the end a little bit, but it gets very, very interesting right after here. In chapter number 2, where we have Eric McBay and Dr. Eileen Mary Halovka writing about games as part of social movements. And here, I'm also super happy to have these authors on board. Eric, for example, has been writing about social movements in a very how to participate and how to make this happen style, which is super interesting to us. We will also get back to social movements towards the end with Ossian's work here, but this is already super interesting. And Eileen has the experience from working as an indie publisher, supporting small studios around special interests and having that side and bringing that perspective to that to build the community around these sort of spaces and these practices, right? Here the takeaway is, yes, you can do pragmatic work inside social movements. Here, these are steps that you could take, and here is how you can learn more. And the other part of it is that doing this in the industry, for example, as a publisher, building your own small stable of studios, is super important to have that collective and this group and support with each other to build your own space for this creative work. Then we have a chapter that is giving us a bit the broader overview over what we mean, or what I also mean when I talk about the systemic issues around problematic gaming or games and sustainability. So this is a little bit the next section, I'm not exactly sure which trigger warnings to put onto this because you came to a sustainability panel, but yeah, this is the darker side of things. So here we talk about with Bush, Che, and Sichwonen, all of these perspectives. So that covers the mining of conflict minerals, in this case, this representing a coltan mine in the Republic of Congo, the mining of these minerals that are necessary to build all this computational hardware that we're using to make mostly digital games. This is a UNESCO good example, coltan mine. The worst cases look much more problematic, and here then we literally looking at situations where people against their will get forced into mining labor by a warlord with forced labor and a gun held against them. To produce the resources that we then use to, in very, very questionable labor practices, assemble into the devices that we're using here. A picture from a Foxconn factory in China. These are the ones that are, I guess, infamous for installing suicide nets at their factories as a means to preventing their workers from taking their own lives. We can of course also discuss the burnout in the games industry, churn and quick burnout rates. Since the EA spouse letter, and this has become a topic, it has just gone up and down but never really disappeared. And it has also been a big topic for us, speaking to our students here. So this is something that of course is in a way also a sustainability issue. E-waste and the e-waste landscapes that are consequences of the faster and faster rates of building new hardware to play the newest games and the newest versions on them. And then it going full circle as something that in research we call the military entertainment complex, where games, both because the heritage of many kinds of games, role-playing games, strategy games, all of this wargaming, like I like my miniature games, like Warhammer and these figures, of course, the origin, literally a German game called Kriegsspiel, is a training tool for officers. But yeah, this is America's Army, which is one of the most successful recruitment tools for the US Army. You can play the game, play it with original military hardware that the US Army is using, and then after the game, click to find out where the next recruitment officers. So the normalization of this colonial exploitation of the planet and her people, that is fueling the newer rounds of hardware production and faster computers and better graphics in the games industry, going full circle when we pay the warlords with guns so that we can get the materials that we build our new gadgets and our new computers with, right? So this, at this speed, is unsustainable on any social, human, or environmental level. And here we can consider games to sit sort of in the center of many of these destructive cycles. On the one hand, the material, but on the other hand, also the cultural, because the cultural side of things that enables us to keep doing this, that is also games. Not games alone, obviously, right? The rest of our media system and our hegemonic culture is also supporting that, but are taking a part of this, right? This is what I consider, and what is really nicely outlined in their chapter from Torsten, Florence, and Tanya here, to be the bigger challenges around sustainability. They also go a little bit deeper than I will be able to present you confidently, talking about financial markets and how the tech industry and money borrowing structures here is impacting what the games market and the games industry is, the environment in which they are living. So whether or not your studio has to close might not necessarily have to do with that you did a good or a bad job. It might have to do with that borrowing conditions and refinancing of loans has changed because the metaverse bubble burst, and now it's a little lull before the investors jump on AI, right? So this environment in which the games exist as well. So this is sort of the darkest section of the book, and maybe this is emblematic for how we would like it to work. We would like it to show people the real world, the real challenge that we need to address, because you have seen this, right? This is what, at least how I read the report from GDC and Game Developer. People say, well, our industry isn't doing enough to address reality. Yes, we agree. Let's take a look at reality. But afterwards, we need to go somewhere and take a look at what we can do. So this is where we have this amazing chapter from Arnaud. He is a senior, was it graphic designer? I think I need to figure this out next time before, apologies, at Ubisoft. But he's an amazing speaker. And what I really value about his contribution is that it does this work of figuring out how to give you a way to start doing something, no matter where you are in the games industry or making games, right? So he builds these structures that say, yes, you can find your own goal that you want to work towards, anchor that with your team, figure out what is your game doing, where is it touching these sort of issues. Any game is touching some of these issues. And then figure out how comfortable are we, how far do we want to push the envelope, what is the message that we can include, where do we feel that we can make a contribution, and gives these sort of perspectives here, right? So we have things that are stand against harmful practices. This is maybe a little bit lower level here. Debunk greenwashing, all the way going to, or from more like ride a bicycle, that is fun. Abolish consumerism, different scale, right? Like how do we want to interact with and where do we find our game and our voice here? Down to giving you a text box to figure out what is your unique impact potential for your game, right? What is the game you're making? What is the topic? How engaged are the people in your team? Anchor it with them, figure out what you can do, where you can start, and then fill this in together in a workshop, right? To see, okay, so how is our game touching these issues and where can we make a start, right? So super amazing. And also in a very, very positive voice addressing that I think is necessary in this space as well. So yeah, our game is perfectly suited to inspire our audience. Who is our audience, right? I left that out. How engaged in a topic do we consider them already? Do we need to carefully nudge them to think about this? Or can we say, okay, these are pragmatic tactics that you should try in your life, right? How do we think about that? How do we motivate them? What should be doing? What should be doing? Which action should they be taking towards which goal, right? And what do we think is our desired player transformation in this? And taking you through all of these steps in this chapter and in these presentations. So really amazing contribution. It also ends with this, one of my favorite parts of this is like, so yeah, so that when our grandkids ask us, what did you do when you learned about the climate crisis? We can proudly tell them we made games, right? As a form of resistance. So yes, super happy to have that. Going on, and this is sort of the framing of the book, taking a look at the second section. So this is about how games are made and how we can take a look at that. Here we have a contribution from David Lump, taking a look at a perspective that is oftentimes, I think, neglected, which is games journalism and environmental journalism in that area. So David has done the work digging through the existing previous venues and efforts to do this sort of games sustainability journalism, giving us a perspective on how this worked and maybe why some of this failed. Also a look in the reality of what it means to be a games journalist, which, as we all know, right, that is also a rough occupation with permanent, constant deadlines for publication and hunting those clicks. But then also making it useful to game developers to say, if you make a game that has a sustainability message, here's a case that did this marketing very well, where a sustainability game connected with the right members of journalists and then found their audience and could make it work. So these are ways that you can maybe think about emulating that or doing something like this as well. So as somebody who's making a game with a sustainability topic, this is what you need to know about games journalism to help you. Building a green game movement from Valley Lopez, an analysis of partly also this, or the climate SIG, like the special interest group in the IGDA, but also the broader climate movement in this space, showing us a little bit, okay, so how does this work? What kind of logics and strengths in this movement do exist? The conclusion, or one of the conclusions being that it's acting on many different levels. Not everybody has the same opinion here, right? And in that sense, also mine or our voice is one of the voices. Others will say different things and have different perspectives on how to interact this change. Most of us or all of us share this goal of wanting to have real material change at the end coming out of this. But he's also highlighting that from his perspective, looking at this, the biggest issue is that the people who want to do this work already are under-resourced. So his biggest takeaway is that we have people who care, who want to do this work, who want to, who are informing themselves already, organizing in their own time, but there's not really support, institutional support for this work yet, and this is something that needs to happen. And then Cindy Poremba, Kara Stone, Ian Garrett, and Ben Abraham talking or writing about exploring sustainable game making through an art game residency. This is a really interesting perspective because it's taking the sustainability question towards your own creative practice. So this means, or can have different shapes, but it means that you in some way, shape, or form, during your own creation or making of the design of the game, consider sustainability questions. You could, for example, go off-grid and make your game based on the solar power that you can get from the sun, and this is the time you have to work on it. And then otherwise you need to maintain your survival in that cottage in some way and be close to nature and actually figure out, okay, so what does that mean? Suddenly not, it also puts you in touch with many gaming audiences around the world who cannot take it for granted that they have perfectly fast Wi-Fi and electricity all the time, right? Which again is a very, very Western perspective. Like Ray is of course correctly calling me out on that all the time as well. So yeah, like we are taking that for granted, right? If the Wi-Fi is off, it's like, oh, what is like, already communicate with the satellites, what are you waiting for, right? But that isn't the reality everywhere. So what do you do with that? And that could be takeaways as well. So what if your gaming session is interrupted by a blackout? Yes. What does that do? What could we take away from that for everybody, right? But also, how can that impact our creative practice and our thinking about this sort of work? How can we make then sort of games and put ourselves in a position that helps us think about this differently? Chapter 4 here, David Harold Tenkate writing about or trying to figure out what is an ecological game in a very similar way or from a different perspective as the chapter that looks at all the challenges around that I just described earlier, also highlighting that in order to consider what an ecological game is, it needs to take into account not just ecological or nature questions, but it needs to take into account also economic questions, need to take into account social and cultural issues as well. So that is opening this up. Of course, and we all know this, sustainability conversations can become very broad and can contain everything and nothing, and we try to keep it to environmental sustainability, but it's important to make this very, very well-argued point here as well, that all these other issues are connected and need to, on some level, be addressed as well, right? So this is also why I, for example, included working conditions in the industry as something that we need to consider here.
Sorry, and Patrick, but you have a few minutes left if you want to ask questions.
Yes, I'll... yeah, then I need to speed up a bit. And we have Vincenzo De Masi, Queen Kedi, Xu Li, and Yuhan Song writing about Chinese practices. That it's an interesting perspective and contrast, because here we see that compliance in a regime and in a perspective where you kind of just have to do what is required from the top does work, where Tencent does actually decarbonize and reduce emissions more successfully than other companies in other spaces, because it's not just, okay, so we can sidestep that a little bit. All right, so section 3 here, yeah, let's see, I have a few slides left. We might compress this. So, yep, I got this. So we have, here we have an interesting perspective from Stefan Werning about sustainability and going beyond nature as a franchise, warning us that we shouldn't do this sort of greenwashing and just applying green color and hey, we have some images of flowers and nature in there, but really take this seriously, which is taken very successfully to the next step by Danielle here, writing about that including different questions of approaching ecologically differently means that you really need to rethink some of the core tenets and mechanics of game genres. Trying to make a management game, in this case, for example, about shallow waters, about small bodies of water, means that you cannot just apply the logic of investment, more capital, and return, because then you turn small water bodies into an attraction that needs to be commodified, and that's not the point. So you need to deeply engage with this. This has been successfully done by a game called Terra Nil, published by Free Lives, a studio from South Africa. And we had Dr. Anya Venter, Sam Alfred, and Jonathan Hao Yoon write about their design work here and how they embraced really the experience of harmony with nature as the most important element of their design, even stepping against normal design knowledge or wisdom to do this. It's really fascinating. So we have empowering communities to define climate goals. I'm missing the authors here. So this is written by Clayton, where he makes a very, very clear point that if you leave your players alone with their message, they cannot maintain this behavior. You need to help people build a community or it won't work. With very interesting qualitative information about somebody who is interested, wants to make the change, and then falls off the wagon because they're alone and they experience harassment and pressure from the outside. So that is fantastic. And then from Hannah Wirman, critical game design paradigms as tools for environmental action, highlighting that it's not every time that we need to give the answer immediately already to the players, but sometimes it's good to give possibility to deliberate and think and experiment a little bit with the games that we are making as an alternative approach here. So as the very last section here, from theory to action, Ossian, Norgren, and Christopher Vaske writing about, there you are, rendering resistance, making defiant games, also about games and resistance, and games and social justice and social action, but a bit more from the perspective of looking at and talking to the creators. What is their process? What are they thinking about it? And how is their making the games part of being resistant, but also part of staying sane in the same process. So bringing that in as well. Also with a very nice list of what kind of games to consider if you want to look at games that are featuring and are part of resistance. Reflections from a game dev activist by Jennifer Estares. A really amazing author here. One of the minds behind one of, if not the most downloaded game on the planet with Subway Surfers. And now Monument Valley 3 coming out soon. So yeah, amazingly beautiful work discussing her journey towards being an activist game designer and the connection of design and making these sort of games, beautiful and wonderful games, and being an activist on the street and being part of that community. So super interesting. And finishing up here with Hexafei discussing surviving the games industry, a very personal account on the difficulties that come with trying to do this work in a space that doesn't necessarily support you or allow that all the time, interacting with the game industry like it's a place in crisis or collapse that might pull the rug under your feet at any time, and how to approach that. Yes, so this is the book for us. Some quick takeaways for you, super basic things. I already mentioned reducing frame rates in the pause screen as the obvious thing. Why aren't we doing this already, right? One of the members, founding members of the SIG, Hugo Bille, a Swedish game developer, built in his game Ultros a way of measuring carbon or energy use for players based on what kind of graphic resolution they choose. So if you put it to 4K, it's going to be all the way up there. If you go down to just high definition, it's half, right? This is just an issue of giving the possibility for players to have informed choices. A next step for us would be to include echo mode as a default to any game, so that people start it on echo mode, and if they want to have the crazy high resolution, they can put it, and the people who want that will know to go to the settings. But everybody else could maybe think about this differently, right? It would be taking steps to do this sort of material change. So my takeaways here are: empower people in your organizations that already want to do this work to organize, to educate you, and to make systemic change, right? They want to do this already. Give them the possibility. Start with those low-hanging fruits, some of which I pointed out here, but make sure that the goal is long-term collective material change, right? Our aim is to change the way we build society. Be vigilant of greenwashing, because that is an easy option and easy out all the time. Maybe we can do, if it seems too easy, it maybe is too easy. Consider my little story that I told in the beginning with Meta. You don't want to be in the situation. You don't want your developers to feel like they're in the situation, that they are doing the best they can, but the way this entire thing is set up, it doesn't lead anywhere. It's a dead end. Make games as a part of social movements. This is a big takeaway. We didn't necessarily expect this to come out from so many developers, that this is something that is their inspiration or something that they do with their game. Games can be part of making this change in a very pragmatic manner. And then build larger collectives and work together, right? Our end point is we want to contribute to a sustainable world, moving beyond greenwashing and empty promises, to use the power of games to make real change. If you're like us, know that we made this book for you. And this is not a done deal. We are looking for more contributors. We're looking for more perspectives for the next time. This is a big challenge. Join us. All right, I think we have some time for questions. All right.
Yeah. If there are any questions, absolutely.
I mean, I can say it for later.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you for coming, Peter.
When is the book coming out?
Yes, that's an excellent question. The initial plan for launching it was and still is GDC 2026. We will see how exactly that pans out, but I hope that I will have more information soon and will be able to share that. But maybe I just wrote with a publisher, he mentioned something about end of the year, and I'm like, oh okay, tell me more. That would be fantastic, but we're not entirely sure yet. But it's in production. Or it's like we only need to check the last reading, so there's no hurdles or anything in the way. Other questions, Ray?
I suppose I've got one. Yeah. It's one of those obnoxious kind of comments
it does lead to questions. So the one thing we can consider is that it's interesting that one of the things we could do is perhaps consider how do we deprioritize AAA games because of the whole push for graphic superiority and everything like that. And we could potentially look at AA studios and the indie game revolution, where indie games particularly have almost removed emphasis on graphic fidelity and have gone back to de-resing and low poly models, and people love it. And so how do we get people to stop going like, just because a game's pretty doesn't mean it's good?
No, and I think that's an interesting point, right? So how can we maybe connect to the rise of indie games that aren't not at all interested in the best graphics, but more expression with limited means? Yeah, absolutely, right? So there's, I think, all of these perspectives that I presented to you, the material, the design ones, they are part of this. I think we can focus on that more as something that we can make together that has lower entry barriers and that is about conveying a meaningful experience more than just making sure that your investment returns function as a AAA studio. But of course, also this is how markets function, right? Like they use polishing to make sure that their returns function. We also need to figure out how to build this on the technical side so that your low-res game doesn't still run on on a monster computer that simulates a low pixel count, but that's not really true. So how to build this technically, how to get that knowledge across to make sure that we can do that. So there's many perspectives here as well, and then making sure that the indie developers that are doing this sort of work can do that in some sort of safe environment as well, and don't need to constantly be worried about that their livelihoods are being taken away or they won't be able to survive on this either, right? So all of these dimensions apply there, but I think this is a step forward away from the ever-ballooning budgets of AAA studios towards something that even then might be useful because we won't be able to play all these huge games anyways, and I think there's a change that is making me hopeful, yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming this early.